My hair is so look at it's like, I think the rule in music production was that if a bit of audio was really up, you should just it up more. Like if it sounds distorted, you should just distort it more so that it sounds at least like vintage or some shit, you know? Can I do that with my hair as well?
Do you want vintage hair?
If my hair is can I just go like Ace Ventura? The world is changing. As Renton from Trainspotting said, in 1,000 years there'll be no guys and no girls, just wankers. Sounds great to me. It's a shame no one told the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Did I say the United Kingdom? Because what I meant to say was the United Kingdom's out-of-touch, spoiled rotten media elite and an overrated author whose views are about as representative of the British public as a camel that lives on the moon. A YouGov poll from 2019 found that the majority of British people support the statements trans men are men and trans women are women. Furthermore, both of these statements were far more supported by women than they were by men. If you've ever interacted with the trans exclusionary radical feminists, that probably isn't surprising. Nowhere is this lack of representation more apparent than in the British media. And I mean all of it. Even The Guardian are at it. Like that time when their American office had to disavow one of their publications for the promotion of transphobic content. And then of course we have the British Blockhead Collective, the BBC. Now, occasionally the BBC's tendency for bigotry is fairly unambiguous, like that time when they published the opinions of an accused serial sex offender who publicly called for the total annihilation of all the trans people. But typically their efforts are a bit more subtle than that. Ambiguity is a staple of British culture. For example, if someone asks me if I want to that could be a sexual invitation, or they could be challenging me to a fight to the death with vomit-stained pool cues in the local pub. Most of the time, we just don't know. For groups like the BBC, it's far more normal for them to push bigoted narratives through a veneer of liberalism, in a way that isn't so apparent unless you're already quite firmly plugged into the conversation. For an example of this, we're going to watch a biology professor discussing transgenderism on the BBC, and then we're going to talk about why exactly his argument is bigoted. So sit back, relax, get your chromosomes out for the lads, and let's do some science.
Academic freedom has been talked about in a number of areas in recent years.
I was rather hoping that you'd be interested in my opinion as a biologist, which seems rather more important, because I'm going to say
I'm just saying only because the issue of academic freedom isn't solely
I'm about to say something that will mean that you'll probably want to edit the programme when I finish, but basically...
Okay. Right. OK, we're all braced for it.
I will say this categorically, that you cannot change your sex.
No f***ing way. How can this be true? What source? You heard the man, comrades. The science has spoken, and it's time for everyone to reattach their cocks and call it a day. Should I leave that in? And we definitely can't use the word transsexual anymore. We're gonna have to try and find a more accurate term, like transgender, perhaps? That's the obvious rebuttal, at least. You could say sex is a biological category, chromosomes, gametes, gonads, etc., and gender is social. Men wear suits, women wear dresses, men cry at football results, and women cry over normal things. The former can't be changed, but the latter can. But I'm not really a fan of this line. Yes, sex and gender are different, but that's not the same as saying that they're completely separate. Maybe one day we'll be living in a world where sex has no bearing on gender, but we don't live in that world just yet. When I was born, they didn't decide I was a boy because I identified as one. They did it because of my absolute weapon of a Y chromosome. In any case, I don't think trans people are necessarily losing any ground by conceding that sex is at least partially connected to gender. But, cards on the table, I'm a idiot, and it probably isn't my place to argue with a professor about biology. The good thing is, I don't need to because he does it himself.
That you cannot change your sex. Your sex actually is there in every single cell in the body. You have a chromosomal sex, you have genetic sex, you have hormonal sex, you have all sorts of different kinds of psychological, brain sex, they're all different. And we are very confused about this, unfortunately.
Wow, that's so interesting. Let's dissect this. Dissect, that's a biological term. I'm smart. So we have genetic sex, chromosomal sex, hormonal sex, and psychological brain sex, which does sound more like the name of a failed 80s electro band than a medical term, but okay. Our biologist here started off by saying that you categorically cannot change your sex, but then went on to list 4 different dimensions of sex, half of which are subject to change. No one would argue that hormonal sex can't be changed. You could even argue that trans people are especially educated in that area, because they take hormones. If your hormones are part of your sex, then what do we say about trans women who have lower testosterone levels than the average cis woman? As for psychological brain sex, which I think we can just get away with calling gender identity, well, obviously that can also vary from what someone was assigned at birth. Before I watched this clip, I would have just classed someone's psychology as a gendered category rather than a sex one, but looks like I was wrong. It's also interesting because if we go by what our biologist is saying here, then the concept of a sex binary kind of becomes impossible. Binary can only have 2 values, for example, a 1 and a 0. To call male and female a binary when there are at least 4 dimensions to sex would be kind of the same as calling blue and green a binary. We can see the 2 as distinct, but if someone asked you to point out the exact spot where blue ends and green begins, you wouldn't be able to. Instead, you'd have a bimodal distribution, with 2 distinct categories at either end, but also a fuzzy middle area of colours that are both greenish and bluish. If we take this guy's definition of sex, we have multiple layers, all of which have a number of variations. Some people are born with both gonads and others with neither. Chromosomes can vary in countless ways beyond XX and XY, and gender identity and hormones both have central roles in the trans experience. Okay, so sex is complicated. Big deal. So why the did I say this was a video about transphobia? This definitely isn't the most blatant expression of bigotry. It's not, say, the BBC platforming the anti-trans opinions of a genocidal maniac. Did I say that already? That's crazy. But yes, British people are usually a bit more subtle. In this case, you can at least start to be suspicious because he's answering a question that no one asked.
Academic freedom has been talked about in a number of areas in recent years.
I was rather hoping that you'd be interested in my opinion as a biologist, which seems rather more important.
Of all the trans people I've ever met, I'm still yet to meet one who has any illusions about their chromosomes or their genetics. If anything, their interactions with the health system seem to make them even more aware of biological sex than the average person. Being trans often involves a lot of engagement with biology. I, like most people, have never had to think about my hormones or my psychological brain sex. So why does he feel like he needs to explain it? Well, let's think of it this way, and I imagine this is an experience that almost everyone has had. We've all met that guy, haven't we? The kind of wanker who feels like they need to teach you very obvious things that you already knew and didn't ask to be taught. And we all know how that feels. It's condescending. It insults your intelligence. It makes you very angry. Kind of like they're effectively calling you stupid without saying it. We all know how that feels, and that is exactly what this guy is doing. Only in his case, it's to an entire group of marginalized people. The problem isn't so much the information he's giving, even if he is a bit sloppy with the delivery. Psychological brain sex. The problem is that you would only need to say what he's saying if you thought that trans people were the way they are because they're delusional. He's calling them stupid without having to say it. And worse, when he gets backlash for saying that, he thinks it's because an ignorant trans rights mob just can't handle the truth. Only about half of this segment is him talking about biology, and the rest is him just complaining about how much trouble he gets in for simply stating the facts.
I'm about to say something which will mean that you'll probably want to edit the programme when I finish, but basically...
Okay. Right.
Well, unfortunately, you can't say this publicly. This is one of the big problems. Even saying this on this programme undoubtedly will result in my getting a huge amount of hate mail. It always does. Overall, I think it's a very sad thing that we can't discuss biological science without actually getting completely caught up emotionally with something which is really completely wrong.
But that's not why people are annoyed. They're annoyed because you're treating them like they need to hear something that they're already very aware of. Like, if someone came up to me and started explaining minor arpeggios to me, I'm not going to be annoyed because I can't handle the truth about minor arpeggios. I'll be annoyed because I didn't ask. I know what a minor arpeggio is. It's this, you asshole. And then I look like the hyper-emotional authoritarian progressive who simply can't handle reality. And the person trying to explain minor arpeggios to me probably ends up on the BBC so they can complain about the fact that they're being silenced for telling the truth about musical theory or some bullshit. I was censored for being smart and talented. But that kind of subtle bigotry is far more effective. Like an age-old bullying tactic, it's a million times easier to attack someone if you can make it look as if they're the ones who threw the first punch. Humans are not rational beings, but we are nonetheless rationalizers. In 1,000 years, there'll be no guys, no girls, just wankers. Sounds great to me.